Shalom, Milam.
Hey, how are you doing, guys?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. It's been a nice weekend.
Yeah. Did you go somewhere?
Yes, we did. We went, just a moment. Fuck. We went for a picnic. It was really nice weather now in Israel. Even though we are in December, it's whatever. That would be like 75 outside.
Oh, nice.
Nice. Went for a picnic. It was super fun. Um,
It was 28,
Well, Fahrenheit. Yeah, 28
28
Fahrenheit.
Fahrenheit.
I don't know what that means.
It's a
Mi-
little bit below zero, so
minus
like
two.
-2, -3 Celsius.
Hey, who is here? Jeremy.
Hi, Elon.
Hey, how are you doing?
I'm good, and yourself?
Not bad at all. Where are we catching you?
I'm in Palm Springs.
In Palm Springs. Weren't you traveling?
Yeah, I got back on Saturday from Asia, and I flew to Palm Springs on Sunday.
Nice. That's life, huh? That's
Yeah,
nice.
indeed.
Perfect. Should I? How do we blur my background or don't blur my background?
You do.
Oh, I like your background.
I'm just
Yeah,
It
it
looks great,
nice.
Elon.
there with a guy from Israel,
Yeah.
a guy from Israel. So can you just text me your
I should open up the take you on a
I
tour.
will go ahead and buy the ticket from Brenner Road to
I just
Gardena.
fixed it up.
Okay, great. All right, I'm just doing that in case something goes wrong. It gives us an extra hour. Okay, perfect. Great.
So what's the time? 9:02.
All right, thank you. I will do so. Okay.
So
Now we hear Jeremy on the phone.
Sorry.
what I'll do in a second, I'll mute everybody, and
Yeah, good.
run through here, just letting other people in, and run through the first part of this discussion presentation, and then take a break. We'll run through another bit, take a break. We'll see how something like that, right?
Sounds great.
Today's meeting, the point is to try and collect things and see how does this whole conflict fit into a bigger sphere, into a worldview, other interests, the countries around us, what do they want, and how does it fit into global politics? And because we can feel how tense this issue is around the world, it means that the people are very interested. Politics is very interested. Lots of interests are intersecting here. Okay, so that's the plan. So, participants, and I am muting you. Okay. And later on, we'll open it up. Yeah? Okay. And now, share screen. Okay. Good. Like I said, we're going to talk today about the bigger sphere and the time span as well. Both of these things, not just kind of in our own small world. There's an idea that I love in politics and in social sciences. It's called a black swan. Right? I found this online when I looked for Google Black Swan. This is Jim Carrey on Saturday Night Live. But actually, I meant this black swan. Okay. If you want to say something is totally unlikely to happen, You can always say, this will happen when pigs learn to fly. It's like, right? It's something that's impossible to imagine, will never happen. Therefore, we have a metaphor for it. In the ancient world, if you would ask a Roman, they wouldn't even think about pigs flying like we do today, which is, right? And they would say, this is as unlikely as a black swan flying over your head. In the ancient world, it was very clear. Swans are white. And it was used in order to teach people logic. They used to say, if all big water birds are swans, all swans are white, all big water birds are white. That's how they taught logic. And then in 1697, a British dude got to Australia and looked around and saw his first black swan. And that went back to the world. Now, a current author called Nassim Taleb, he came up with this theory, and he called it the black swan event. These events are things that nobody can expect, right? And nobody think will happen. For a classic example, 9/11. Who could imagine that a small terrorist organization across the world can do what happened on 9/11, right? It's a jump. It's a black swan event. It's that moment that pigs suddenly learned how to fly. For example, if you take Europe, let's say that France and Germany are the strongest partners today in Europe. The closest, strongest ties, the two biggest economies, more or less, in Europe. After the Second World War, after the First World War, after the Franco-Prussian War, how the heck, after 100 years of warring, are they the best friends? That's a reverse black swan event. Nobody would have expected that in 1945. Who would expect that an American president after the Second World War, after the Korean War, after Vietnam, will fly to China and make relations with them? That couldn't be expected before. Jimmy Carter will bring back together Anwar Sadat and Menachem Begin to make peace in 1979. In 1976, 1967, and 1973, two enormous wars between Israel and Egypt, the two biggest armies in the area. And just look at them all laughing there, brought some a peace. 1989, 10th, 11th of November, the Berlin Wall falls. Nobody could expect that to happen. 1991, Nelson Mandela is out of jail, and democratic elections in South Africa. Nobody could expect that to be the end of the situation that they were in none of these stories. And there's so many other black swan events. Some of them are positive, some of them are negative. Our big black swan event that we're talking about is the 7th of October. Nobody in Israel expected it. Even though we've been watching the Palestinians, we knew what's happening, Hamas, nobody expected that. Not the army, not the politicians, not policy wonks, not journalists. Nobody expected what happened on the 7th of October. A black swan event, right? It's easy to feel it when it's a negative story, because it's usually very dramatic. It happens in a moment. 9/11 happened in a moment. 7th of October happened in a moment, right? Peace processes, right, are a little bit slower, but they're also black swan events. So this is a very important thing, and it's a very important thing in the dynamic between Israel and Palestine and Israel and the Arab world, right? This is what I call the one step back, two steps forward formula of Israel-Arab relations, right? A black swan event that we had is the establishment of State of Israel. If you would ask anybody sane-minded in the 1920s, 1930s, will there be an independent country for Jews called Israel in Palestine? They would say, absolutely not. It makes no sense. That won't happen. And suddenly, 1948, it happens. And that country wins the War of Independence. Another black swan event, right? 1967 is the big black swan event of ours. Suddenly we are from this tiny little country of Holocaust survivors, we become this enormously strong thing. And then our other black swan event happened, 1973, the Yom Kippur War. Suddenly we're not that strong. We suddenly become small, cowering, they're attacking us. That dissonance between those two feelings, when Israel goes from being strong to suddenly going weak, something grows in the Israeli population that's called political will. To go to war, usually you can find a good enough reason. But to go for peace, the first thing you need to do is do concessions. And that takes a lot of political will. For Israel to bring that political will, it needs to be strong and suddenly go weak. And then Israel creates the political will because it says, I don't want to be in that weak position anymore. In the Arab countries around us, the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948, the 1967 Six-Day War made them very weak. For them to have concessions with Israel, they need to suddenly feel strong. Israel could make peace with Egypt after it lost in the Yom Kippur War. Egypt could make peace with Israel after it won, in their view, in the Yom Kippur War. They needed that pride for them to be accepting for that move. So 1973 Yom Kippur War, 6 years later, peace with Egypt, right? And I'll jump to the fourth point there. 1987, the first Intifada, the first Palestinian uprising, massive protests, a lot of violence against police and army in the West Bank and in Gaza. Really shocked Israeli society. It ran for 2 to 4 years, depending how you count it. 1993, the Oslo Peace Accords between Yitzhak Rabin and Yasser Arafat, between Israel and the Palestine Liberation Organization. 1994, you can see above, Yitzhak Rabin shaking the hand of King Hussein of Jordan. 2001, we had the second Intifada, even worse Palestinian uprising in the sense of Israeli casualties. 4 years later, Israel does the disengagement from Gaza, leaves Gaza, takes out all the settlements that it had in Gaza, 7,000 people, all the military presence. Again, Israel needs to go down in its feeling of strength in order to be willing to do concessions and have the political will. Palestinians need to feel strong in order not to demand everything from Israel and do concessions, right? In 2009, Benjamin Netanyahu comes to power and he changes this, what do you want to call it? Well, I have only the word in Hebrew, a math problem, whatever, this math problem. He changes the calculation here. Bibi says, I don't go to war. During Bibi's prime ministership for the last 14 years in a row, but about 16 years, he's not gone to any big war. No very big operation, not in Gaza and not in Lebanon. He wanted Israel to slowly get stronger. But he also will not waste any political capital to give anything to the Palestinians. And he succeeded in keeping that from 2009 till 2023 as his way of working. He succeeded in that. We changed the arithmetic, the calculation. We don't give them anything, and we don't go to war. We don't need to feel super strong. In 2023, the Black Swan event came and changed that calculation. It was the 7th of October. To kind of close up what we did in the last two sessions, right? In this context, Hamas is a religious organization. That's very important for them. They put their highest, their most energy into fulfilling their religious messianic viewpoint of the world in order to get independence for Palestinians and to get the whole land of Palestine. And specifically with them, right, even though they are an organization that's grassroots, that's come from a background of welfare, their way of thinking is based on extremist Islam, in the sense that using violence and extreme violence is a acceptable way of getting to their goal. And therefore, we have a lot of terrorism coming from Hamas. They are, in order to get to their goals, they might be willing to give up on a few points here and there. But they're not willing to give up on the two things that the world and Israel demands of them: the extremist Islamist way and terrorism. Israel, on the other hand, is trying to keep its Western-style democracy with protests and freedom of speech and the whole shebang. It's trying at the same time to be a prosperous nation, the startup nation, right? To be this very prosperous nation and to have a sense of security, right? You see this soldier with his girlfriend in the picture, and in the background he has his M16 rifle just kind of leaning on a trash can, right? He's waiting for an officer to come and punish him for that. But that sense of security, when you have a soldier that goes down to the beach with his girlfriend and can just lounge around on the beach, that's what Israel wants. It wants a sense of security. And Benjamin Netanyahu, for better and worse, succeeded in giving that to Israel until 2023, 7th of October. And he specifically said he's not willing to give up on two things. And the majority of Israel agreed with that for a very long time. He's not willing to give up on land, meaning settlements in the West Bank, and he's not willing to give up on Israel's right to intervene militarily, to get a sense of security from having a strong army. If Hamas will not change its way of terrorism and extreme Salafist Islam, and Israel will not change the point of the land settlements and its absolute right to intervene militarily when it wants, you won't be able to get to a mix there. Last point I'll say before we'll open up a bit to see if there are any questions. There's a difference between Israel and Hamas, very big one. Massive difference between the two. Israel is a democracy, for better and worse, better, stronger democracy, weaker democracy, more liberal, less liberal, but it is a Western-style democracy. And it's a globally recognized democracy. That is why the world, on the one hand, criticizes Israel, because it is a democracy, and you can criticize. And second of all, it also says it's Israel's responsibility to decide who its leaders are, because it's a democracy. I will not intervene in Israeli politics, militarily or other ways, because it's a democracy. They decide who they are. Hamas is very different, because it's a totalitarian state. And therefore it's unrecognized by the world. And we are in a moment in history now that the world is giving Israel, in a sense, the right and the ability to stop the Hamas. The world is allowing Israel to use force in order to stop the Hamas. With all the casualties in Gaza, which are humongous, right? The world is allowing this. The United States is backing Israel because it says Hamas, as a totalitarian terrorist actor, is not a legitimate partner. But the world is also saying to Israel, you are a democracy. Therefore, you and your people have a responsibility to also work for a longer solution. And the world is pretty agreed upon the solution that needs to be here. It's not a big surprise to anybody. But we're at a certain loggerheads. Benjamin Netanyahu, as we talked about him, he is stopping this from developing. And the Hamas is also stopping it from developing. Hamas will be dealt with militarily. Israel is dealt with diplomatically. What is that and how is Israel dealt with? Talk about it in a minute. Are there any questions? If anybody wants to ask a question, just unmute yourself and we'll discuss.
Thank you, Ilan. So, my question that I probably asked before is that how was it possible for Netanyahu and then really the Israel as a state to plan existence of Israeli state with this unresolved Palestinian question, just sitting on the bomb? You cannot imagine that you will just lock all those millions of people in this very small space and that you will be able to control them. It's impossible historically, right?
That's a really, really interesting question. Well, I'll put it like this. It's not always impossible to stay in a situation that's unresolved. Diplomatically, politically, you can stay in a situation which is unresolved for quite a while. And sometimes that works in your favor, right? No offense to anyone, but I always take the example of Texas, right? Texas was once not part of the United States. It was part of Mexico. Texan farmers moved there, settled down. After a while, they got very numerous. They proclaimed an independent country there, right? And then war ensued. And today, nobody asks for Texas back. This is not a very good example, right? But I'm just saying that sometimes you can stay in a level of things unresolved. Now, I'll just end this long answer of mine that I suddenly realizing I'm again rambling, with Henry Kissinger. Henry Kissinger is the architect of the United States and Israel relations regarding Palestine and the Arab world. And Henry Kissinger came and said, okay, the United States will assist you as a center of democracy in the Middle East, will not publicly push you to get a solution now for the Palestinian issue, but under the table, in closed corridors, the United States will say what it wants to say. And that's how the relationship pretty much was, with little ups and downs, till today. And that's still what it is today. The United States is hugging Israel very strongly. Biden is hugging Israel very publicly. The government is hugging Israel. And in closed doors, today, Secretary of Defense was here, Lloyd Austin, the American. The same. Publicly, he's very supportive. And then we start getting news articles about what he actually said in the closed rooms. So that's what it was until today. And now we are going to a moment, I think, that there'll be a lot more pressure. But yeah, enough for a long, long answer. Anyone else? Jack?
Yeah, I have a question. My question is, do Israeli Jews and Israeli Arabs have the same rights in Israel?
Yes. Yes.
What about serving in the army?
Yeah, that's not a right, that's a obligation. So we have the same rights, we don't have the same obligations in Israel. Not everybody serves in the army. Arabs generally, Arab Muslims and Christians are exempt from military service, but also like ultra-Orthodox Jews are exempt. Arabs have the same rights as Israelis, but like any country in the world, there is discrimination. In any country in the world, there is an idea of who are the core constituents of the idea of that nation. And then there's discrimination the further you go from what people believe to be the core of that nation. And that always also changes in every country. And I can't say that there's no discrimination against Arabs in Israel. There definitely is, right? But it is discrimination, right? It's not Jim Crow in Israel. Okie dokie. I'll go back to sharing. What I want to kind of move to now. Sorry, I am. So, like I say, because Israel's a democracy, it gets treated differently than Hamas. But also, because Israel's a democracy, it's getting all this criticism against it for its actions. Criticism does affect policymakers. But in the end, policymakers in the United States and globally recognize Israel's right to defend itself and recognize the right not to have this totalitarian actor next to it. As horrible as that might be with the war unfolding and the civilian death toll in Gaza, the world is accepting it at the moment. But I want to talk a moment about our neighborhood, because I guess you must have heard that this whole 7th of October thing could be connected to the upcoming deal between Israel and Saudi Arabia for peace. It could be something to do with Iran. It could be even something to do with the relationship between the United States and Russia or China. So I want to try and pull in these different actors into our story. Right? What are the interests of the countries around us? I'll go through the countries without too much detail. That was what I did for half a day working on this presentation, was to remove information I found like fascinating about each one of these countries, but let's see how much I succeeded in removing. We'll start with Iran. Iran on the other side of the Middle East. It's the big actor who's standing on the other side in this event. The map I put up on the left, it shows the lines, the current countries in the world, and you'll see Iran. But in pinkish, it is the dream of old, right? Iranian culture has something very similar to Israeli Jewish culture. In the Israeli and definitely in the Jewish culture, we have a term for us We call ourselves Jews. And then we have a word for everybody else, goyim in Hebrew. So it's a very much a world view that puts yourself as something very important. And in Iranian Persian culture, they have the same thing. They call themselves Iran, and everybody else is called Turan. They have a very strong sense of self, and that comes from their days as a big empire. And that's what you see here. And Iran sees itself not only as a Muslim state, as the state of the Islamic Revolution, or anti-America, or anti-West. It sees itself as the empire of old, a country that's supposed to have influence in all the region. And that's what Iran is trying to do, have influence in the region. And they've taken a stance since the time of Ayatollah Khomeini, who's in the picture at the bottom on the right? Ayatollah Khomeini, their stance was anti-Western, Muslim and anti-Western. The picture up above was this people walking by some graffiti. If you look at the graffiti well on the wall behind those people walking, you'll see in the blue circle, it's the American eagle holding the arrows and the olive branch, the United States, and above it, a Star of David. It's a mural contest that was done in Iran to commemorate the 50th year since the taking of the American consulate, embassy in Tehran. For them, the ones that they're standing against is the Western culture. It's the Western culture, promiscuity, and things that will not bring us closer to heaven. So in order to become a stronger nation in the area, to push their clout, they need to become a strong military country. And that's really the idea of getting nuclear weapons. And that's a big thing that they were trying to do, to become a very strong counterpower to American influence. American influence comes through Israel, through its deal with Egypt as well in the peace process between Israel and Egypt, and Saudi and the Gulf states. So Iran is standing against all of those. None of them like Iran in the area. Not Saudi, not the Gulf, not Israel, not Jordan, and not Egypt. And Iran is trying to get bigger. Over the last decade, Israel went on a secret espionage move to stop Iran from getting nuclear weapons, to stop their main plan of how to have clout in the region. Unbelievably successful. If you had a degree in nuclear physics and lived in Tehran, you looked around behind your shoulder because the Israeli Mossad is coming. That's how it was for years. Attacks and espionage and stealing material and putting in spyware and so forth and this and that. And Iran was just plain shamed again and again. And Iran tried to retaliate against Israel. It tried kidnapping Israelis abroad. It tried instigating terrorist attacks. It was extremely unsuccessful. So what does Iran do? Iran funds paramilitary terrorist organizations in the Middle East in order to do its bidding because it still doesn't have the military power. And that's in Iraq, the Shiite organizations, that's the Houthis in Yemen, that's Hezbollah in Lebanon, that's propping up Assad's government in Syria, all of these things. And the Hamas in Gaza, even though they come from different worlds, Shiite, Sunni, different ideologies, they're propping up the Hamas. As Israel was getting closer to creating a deal with Saudi and all the Gulf states, Iran knew it has to act. And it tried in different ways. None of them succeeded. All analysts of Iran politics will tell you Iran did not give the order for Hamas to do the 7th of October attack. It's pretty much agreed upon. However, Iran did train all of the elite Hamas forces, the Nukhba. Iran did fund a lot of the weapons coming into Gaza. Iran helped the smuggling of weapons into Gaza. Iran knew that if it puts enough power there, at one point they will be the ones that will stop all of this regional realignment around the West. So it's not a direct order, but it's pushing towards that. So Iran's help in this, its hand in this, is propping up Hamas and knowing that Hamas at its own point in time will do what Iran wants to be done, to attack Israel and weaken it, so they can have a larger part in the region. Egypt, amazing country, lovely. If you haven't been there, you should. Going down the Nile is amazing. Visiting a culture that makes Persia and Iran look young. Egypt's culture even makes Judaism look young. And these things go back forever. It's unbelievably beautiful. And it's also very poor. Around 60% of Egyptians, according to Egyptian numbers, are poor, below the poverty line. Egypt has 17% unemployment, which is a very high number, 17% unemployment. Egypt still has almost 50% of its population living in villages, in agricultural villages. It's a very unequal country. Until 1967, Egypt ruled over Gaza directly. In the Six-Day War, Israel took, if you see the map of Egypt, there's this peninsula that's touching Israel. It's colored in the color of Egypt, in this yellowish cream color. And it's called the Sinai Peninsula. Israel took all of the Sinai Peninsula as well from Egypt in 1967. And Gaza. In 1973, the Yom Kippur War, Egypt attacked Israel. It took us a very long time to push them back. And in 1979, we signed a peace treaty. It's an enormous country, Egypt. Around 100 million people in Egypt. Enormous. Second largest recipient of military aid from the United States after Israel. It's very important in the area for American and Western interests, but it's extremely poor. And for those years between 1948 and 1967, when it ruled over Gaza, it didn't make it part of Egypt. Jordan ruled over the West Bank, and all the Palestinians living in the West Bank were given Jordanian citizenship. None of the Gazans were given Egyptian citizenship. The Egyptians do not need working hands, does not need more poor people who all they have is their own work, because Egypt has a lot of poor people who all they have is their hands to work with. So Egypt didn't want in 1948 to make Gaza part of it, and didn't want when the peace treaty was signed. They left Gaza to Israel. And today, one of the big fears was that Israel, through its attack in Gaza, will push the Gazans into the Sinai Peninsula, into Egypt, as they will be fleeing from the bombardments. Egypt said very clearly to Israel, no way. No way. They didn't even want to allow opening for humanitarian cases to come out. They did in the end for bad humanitarian cases, and that's the main entry for humanitarian aid to go into Gaza. However, they allowed for people who were badly injured to go to hospital in Egypt only if they signed a document that says once the treatment is over, they go back to Gaza. Egypt does not want to take the Gaza issue from Israel. It says it's Israel's issue. And maybe 4 weeks ago, you might have heard on the news, there was some talk about maybe some of the Palestinians fleeing or setting up refugee camps in Egypt. The Egyptian prime minister gave an interview 3 days ago in Al Jazeera. There was just elections in Egypt. Don't be surprised if in about 5 days you'll find out that Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, the president of Egypt, was voted in once more with 91.2% of the vote. It's not exactly a clean elections. But Sisi, the president, gave an interview and said that Benjamin Netanyahu has been pressuring European prime ministers and presidents to put pressure on Egypt to allow refugees in. And on Al Jazeera, he said, if that pressure continues, this might be a reason to end the Israel-Egypt peace treaty. I don't think that he really means it, but he's saying he's extremely angry. This is something that Egypt will not be pushed upon. Egypt will not take responsibility over Gaza. Egypt is waiting for other Arab nations to get involved, and Egypt will send people to work in Gaza. That's the idea. 2 other countries around Israel, Jordan and Lebanon. On the left is the king of Jordan, and on the right is what's left of the port of Beirut in Lebanon. Well, let's start with Jordan. Jordan is a country that's at peace with Israel since 1994. This king's father, this king is called Abdullah, his father Hussein signed a peace treaty with Israel. Abdullah used to be a military man, became king afterwards. Jordan is a success story for a country with absolutely nothing. Not a great success, but for a country with absolutely nothing, with no natural resources, it's very successful. It has 18% unemployment. For a country with nothing, that's not that bad. Jordan has received the most refugees per capita in the world. If you compare the amount of people that live in Jordan, 10 million, to the amount of refugees they've received, it's more than any country in the world. They've received Palestinian refugees and they've given them citizenship. About 75% of all Palestinian refugees are citizens, 75% of Palestinian refugees in Jordan are citizens of Jordan. That means that 50% of the Jordanian population is Palestinian, and they vote. Jordan is the only Arab country to return its ambassador from Israel back to Jordan. That's because its population demands it. They're very Palestinian. On the other hand, it hasn't touched the peace treaty between the 2 countries. Jordan needs stability. Jordan is at the moment bidding to join the Gulf states in one economic zone. It's a country with nothing, and it's betting on it that if everything is okay, the Gulf states will prop it up. The peace treaty with Israel is extremely important for Jordan because Israel is the only port that the Jordanians can use to export to Europe. If you go to the north of Israel, you see trucks crossing from Jordan to Israel constantly. Trucks exporting from Jordan. It's extremely important for them. So they're walking a tightrope, publicly saying to Israel that they disagree, but underground, keeping quiet. Lebanon is a different story. Lebanon is a totally destroyed country. It has an economic breakdown that's unbelievable. In the last 10 years, Lebanese money has lost 98% of its value. Think that if you had $100, it would be worth $2 after 10 years. Think what you could buy $100 10 years ago. Now you have only $2 in today's world. Unbelievable situation. In the south of Lebanon, there's an organization that was started to fight against Israel when Israel actually occupied part of Lebanon, called Hezbollah. Hezbollah stockpiled, became a very big organization, became very rich. It encompasses about 20% of the voters in Lebanon. Hezbollah became part of the government. And Hezbollah stockpiled chemicals that were used in making ammunitions in a storehouse in the port of Beirut until one day in 2019, it blew up and blew up an enormous part of the city. You can see this was the port. It's totally gone. Hezbollah is under enormous pressure not to get involved in the war in Israel. Enormous pressure from Lebanon itself. Lebanon cannot even imagine the idea of having to go to war with Israel now. It's not that Hezbollah is not incredibly strong and makes a real and important threat on Israel. They have an enormous arsenal of rockets and quite a lot of soldiers. However, internally, the Lebanese people are holding Hezbollah and saying, don't you dare. We cannot live through another Israeli attack. These two countries, one speaks negatively about Israel and keeps quietly. Hezbollah acts negatively, but actually is pretty quiet. So from these two countries, there's pretty much a quiet situation. They don't want to see escalation. The Gulf states, the GCC, the Gulf Cooperation countries. It's these 6 countries here: Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, UAE, and Oman. They are about money at the moment, petrol money, oil money. And it's incredible the amount of money there. The Burj Khalifa is this big tower, the tallest tower in the world. Nobody needs it. It's just because they have so much money. And their money's coming from oil and gas. Enormous amounts of money. Enormous. And they know very well that peak gas, the moment there's going to be less gas and their incomes will start to drop, will start in the year 2035. It's not a long time. 12 years from now, all of these countries will have to start preparing for a downturn in the production of oil that they have. This is going to be incredible. So all of these countries are trying to see what to do in the future. What to do with their money in the future. One big thing that happened to them, in 2014, the United States, for the first time in history, went energy independent. I don't know if you've heard of this, but today, the United States creates more energy through gas, oil, coal than it actually needs. And it's a net exporter. Under George W. Bush, about 40% of American oil came from the Middle East. Now you don't need it anymore. These countries didn't just stay with that oil. From 2013 to 2023, China invested $1 trillion in these 6 countries. $1 trillion over 10 years. This year it was a very low year, only $65 billion. And China gets 45% of its oil from these countries and Iran. Once the US moved out, China moved in. China has been building harbors and ports, whole cities, train lines, pipelines. These countries start to see that economically, they have a good relationship with China. China is the #1 trade partner for Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates in things that are not oil. China buys #1 from these countries, anything they'll make. China has become an incredibly important trade partner. But they know that in order for the future to be rosy towards them, once they have less oil, they need to have another type of power, not just the economic power. They have to have regional power. All of the Gulf states has given Saudi the prime role. Saudi has the most oil, the most people, the most organization, the most history. It's the leader of all these countries. And they said, Saudi, you become our protector. When you have so much, you need protection. Against who? Against Iran, #1. But in order to be that defender, they need the United States. The United States has moved back in the world, decided to invest less. That's why China is investing so much there. Saudi, through the Abraham Accords, has decided to change that. All these Gulf countries, they know if they're going to have security and they'll be able to push around other countries in their area, have clout, they need an army. They need power. This they give to Saudi. Saudi has an enormous army today, and it's growing. And it has the most advanced jets and ships. But it still doesn't have the top of the top. The United States, when it sells its stuff, it goes through the Department of Defense, and every country can buy a different list of things. There are countries like the UK and France and Germany and Italy and Japan and Israel that can buy everything from the United States. NATO countries and Israel and Japan are in a situation, in a treaty agreement with the United States that allows all the most secret military things to be sold. That's where Saudi wants to be. It wants to get the top stuff. It wants to get the Iron Dome. There was a co-manufacture between Israel and the United States. It wants to get the Arrow system that shoots down ballistic missiles. It wants to get all of these things, and it wants to get just before nuclear power. They want to have enough nuclear knowledge that if Iran creates a bomb, they can create a bomb. And Israel was never willing to accept that until the Abraham Accords. An idea that will bring in Saudi and all the Gulf states on the side of the West fully. What does Israel get from it? Israel gets from it cheap oil. Israel gets from it true access to its own region. You can't even imagine how much Israel's gross domestic product, GDP, our earnings, the money in the country is lower because there's not one land border we can really export or import from. No offense, Jordan has nothing that we need. It would jumpstart everything. It would give us a trade partner, would give us a regional space, right? That's what Israel is wants to get from this. The Saudis and the Gulf want to get American technology. And what does the United States want? The United States wants to push China a little bit out. That's Xi Jinping in the picture, meeting with MBK. Mohammed bin Salman is the crown prince, the ruler of Saudi effectively. China has taken over the United States' place without a doubt in sending money around. Once the US was the richest, the biggest, the strongest, and would push money around and change countries through it. Today, China is doing it. I don't know if you've heard of the Belt and Road Initiative. China is building infrastructure everywhere in the world. China is giving more money in Africa than the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund together. It's investing enormous amounts. Wherever the US has moved out, China is investing there. But there is something that China can't give a country. China can't give a country security. Even if the US has moved back from some places, the US's power is uncomparable. China has moved into the area of the Red Sea and the Gulf there, 6 destroyers, 6 big ships in order to protect the maritime lanes. The United States has a whole fleet there and can move into their extra fleets whenever it wants. What the Saudis and the Gulf states want, they want a protection deal from the United States. They want to tell the United States, if you want your interests kept here, if you want a stable price for gas and oil, which is unbelievably important in order to put sanctions on a country like Russia and Putin. It's unbelievably important in order to get gas and oil and heating to Europe. If you want the Gulf states and Saudi to stop China from having all this influence, if you want to have a lasting influence here, if you want to stop Iran, you get into this protection deal. Saudi and the Gulf want to be NATO. Want to be NATO. And for being NATO, they're willing to push aside China. They'll still take Chinese money, but the interest will be American there. And that's the big deal. In order between Saudi and the Gulf states and the United States stand Israel. Sorry, jumped out. Mideast war turns spotlight on Arab gas pipeline. Israel says energy company will test pipeline from offshore. These are all the ideas that are coming up to do with the gas and oil coming from the Gulf. Today, in the Gulf and in Saudi, if you want to move oil around, no problem. No problem, they've been doing that since the 70s extremely well. But gas is different. Liquid gas on ships is different, it's very complicated. It's much easier to push that gas in a pipe. If you want to get the gas from Saudi and the Gulf states to Europe, that goes through Israel. Again, all of these things are connected here. And then you have Benjamin Netanyahu and Joe Biden. Like we said, Joe Biden is giving a hug to Israel. It's bringing a lot of military force to this area, a lot of protective force for Israel. It's saying to Israel, don't worry about the Hezbollah in the north and Iran. That's us. And when the United States is doing that, it's not doing it only for Israel. It definitely is doing it for Israel. It's definitely doing it because we have very special relations and security relations, but it's also doing that in order to show the Saudis and the Gulf states what they will get if they get into this real treaty with the United States, if they push back China. if they join this Western group fully, they get the protection of the United States. This is the US showing all the world and China as well what is the US power in Israel. And in that sense, in this photo, it was a little bit hard to find because when you Google Biden and Benjamin Netanyahu, you usually find photos with Benjamin Netanyahu scowling at Biden. It's usually, that's how it's used in the media. Benjamin Netanyahu scowls and Biden is kind of, again, this guy, I can't deal with him. But in this photo, you can see how Netanyahu is listening very well. This is the last meeting when Biden came over here to Israel in the beginning of October. And Netanyahu was on his best behavior. The relationship between the two is absolutely horrible. It's absolutely horrible. Last time Biden was in Israel before this meeting, he came during Obama's first term and came to broker again a deal between Israel and Palestine. And Israel was supposed to start a ban on building new settlements a day after Biden left. And during Biden's visit in Israel, it gave the last okay to build more settlements just before the deadline came in. And Biden was on Air Force One on the way back home, and newspapermen were asking him, oh, what you said to Netanyahu, he didn't care. He just published that he is building new settlements anyhow. And that's been the relationship between the two. But Biden is a person of real politics. He is a big believer in diplomacy and in the slow maneuver, right? And he is at the moment hugging Netanyahu. But the fact that at the moment, today, the Secretary of Defense of the United States was in Israel, and he sat in on the war cabinet meeting and met with the Chief of Staff of the Israeli Army and got from them a blow-by-blow explanation of what they did and what they're going to do. Shows that the United States has a hug that whenever it wants, it can put a lot of pressure on Israel. And that's last point will be about the future. Okay, I'll stop now this bit. Let's see if there's any questions. Please feel free to unmute yourself if you want. If you have a question. What it says to me here.
Actually, so I have a question about Jordan. So, and well, in a way, also, Israel is sort of losing the public opinion war in the world because everybody is talking about Palestinian children and civilians being killed, but nobody is actually talking much about Egypt not admitting Palestinians or other Arab countries not really admitting Palestinians. So it's all critics of Israel, and it's this horrible unresolved situation. But then, so how is it actually that Jordan is doing, you said, so well, having nothing, and then actually admitting many Palestinians and giving them citizenship?
Jordan is a funny country. Okay, let's see. Let's start with Egypt for a second. Egypt is not accepting Palestinian refugees. It says it, if you will ask it, why not? It says, we are here to help the Palestinians get a country and an independent state. And that independent state will happen through negotiations between Palestinians and Israel. We will not take Israel's responsibility to find an equitable solution. That's how they will answer it. What they're also saying is, hell no, I will not take in 2.2 million dirt poor people. I have about 60 million dirt poor people. I can't deal with it. And they're also saying for Egypt, the peace with Israel is incredibly important. The military assistance they get from the United States is predicated on the peace treaty between Israel and Egypt. Egypt is doing a lot to keep the peace between Israel and Egypt alive and strong. A lot. And they know that if they allow in, let's say, 200,000 Palestinian refugees, these refugees aren't going to flee into the north of Egypt and say, Kumbaya, life is great. I don't care about my Palestinian homeland anymore. They will instigate attacks against Israel from Sinai, and then Israel has to retaliate in Sinai, which is sovereign Egyptian territory. And the Egyptians don't want to go back to a situation of war with Israel.
You know, I understand it completely. It's just that for me, it's kind of hard to understand why Israel is being so criticized about everything, but then Egypt is not. And then I understand Egypt's reasonings, but the world, the public opinion is not really criticizing Egypt like, oh my God, those countries, Arab countries, they should take those poor Palestinians. Nobody is criticizing Arab countries for that.
Why is the criticism so focused on Israel?
Right.
Okay. This is a difficult question to answer, right? It has a lot to do with historic outlook on the Jewish people. There is anti-Semitism here. I don't think it's the main issue. And I also, I'll just add another, okay. I'm taking that back and trying to reorganize this answer. Okay, let's start with this. Egypt is getting less criticism than Israel because Egypt politically has succeeded in putting itself in the stance that it's not their problem. Jordan also succeeded in saying it's not their problem, it's Israel's problem to find a solution with the West Bank and Gaza. This is also what Israel said, right? We say we are responsible over this area. We are the ones that say we do not accept the Palestinians have an independent state. Therefore, it's accepted in the world that Israel is the focus to deal with this problem. That's one. That's why Egypt is not getting much flack. Number two, why is Israel getting so much criticism? One reason, because it's a Western democracy. I expect different things from Syria than from a Western democracy. I expect different things from Libya than from Italy. So there is a double standard there, but it has to do with us being a Western democracy. That's one. Number two, Israel in its past, there was enormous support for it. Enormous. The support had to do with Israel being the country of the Jews that got out of the Holocaust. And number two, it had a lot of support because Israel was seen as the small and weak versus all the Arab countries put together. Israel, unfortunately for Israel, succeeded in becoming strong. And the moment you are strong, you get less sympathy. The strong one, if there's a fight and you don't know what's the reason between two people, one big and strong, one small and weak, even if you don't know the reason, you will get angry at the big guy, and it doesn't matter what the small guy did. There is that in the world, how we look at it. And that's one of the reasons that it flipped between being pro-Israel a lot to today pro-Palestinian. Number three, this sits a lot of times on a very basic view of Israel and Jews in the Western world. I can't hide it in any way. There is a basis in the Western world of anti-Semitism. So when this turns around, it kind of falls into this game as well, that kind of strengthens the voices. So add all of these things, and Israel gets a lot of criticism, many times more than it deserves, but it also works on the other direction. Many times Israel gets less criticism than it deserves, because a lot of countries feel very connected to Israel easily, right? Israel was allowed to hold a blockade around Gaza for an indefinite amount of time, not just allowed, but also helped by many countries, because Israel is still seen there as the weak and is allowed to protect itself. Yeah. I think this is becoming lecture again instead of answer. Anything else, guys? Question? Query? Okay. If not, I'll go back to my last couple of points now. My last couple of points. How do you do it? Sorry, 1 second. Okay. This is the Abraham Accords. This is the signing of the treaty between, this has Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu in the center, and the foreign ministers of Bahrain and United Arab Emirates. This is bringing this situation, I've been to Dubai now twice. Obviously, I didn't actually really stop there in flights, or actually 4 times through Dubai. 2.5 years ago, it would be unimaginable that I'd land in Dubai. And now it's no problem. Just fly through, stop here, go shopping. There's no problem. And you'll see Israelis there and they speak Hebrew. It's amazing. On the one hand, it shows us, first of all, that there's no inherent problem between Muslims and Jews. But it's not an inherent problem. They have no problem accepting us there. But this is what was stopped. The idea of this Abraham Accords, as it was instigated by Benjamin Netanyahu and Donald Trump and other countries, was without the Palestinians. We're going to make this trilateral agreement between the Gulf states and Saudi to the United States and Israel, and we will all forget about the Palestinians. The 7th of October was a shout out saying, you cannot forget us in this. You cannot. And in that sense, this wasn't Iran instigating it, it was the Palestinians themselves. It just fits Iran's motives in the region. And a horrible massacre happened on the 7th of October. And incredibly hard fighting for the last 72 days of Israel and Gaza, with unimaginable civilian casualties in Gaza. But this is an elastic moment. This is a moment where diplomacy gets stronger. Because everybody now has very similar interests here. China doesn't want fighting in this area because it has enormous economic interests here. China has built, I don't know if you know, the Suez Canal is 2 canals today. There are 2 Suez Canals, one next to another. China has built a 2nd canal. It has incredible economic interests in this area. They don't want fighting. Saudi and the Gulf states, they definitely don't want fighting in this area. Look at what's happening now with Yemen, who's shooting at ships at that area. They're hating that. They definitely don't want that. They want to get to a security deal. Egypt doesn't want this war. Jordan doesn't want this war. At this moment, the ones that need this war is Israel. And it's getting backing from the United States. And after, you haven't heard in the news that the ambassador of the United Arab Emirates has left Israel and gone back to UAE. He's still here. We still have a peace with these countries. We still have an ambassador from Egypt, an ambassador from Turkey. None of them want the Hamas to rule. They all accept that Hamas is not a legitimate partner. Some of them are willing to work with Hamas if it stays, but they prefer not to have it there. Each one of these countries is seen today as in the world as a rich, dripping with gold and zero interest in the world, no real moral stance, have nothing really to give to the world except their money and a second Louvre that was going to be opened in Dubai. They want to change that image of themselves. They want to have more regional influence. And for that reason, they want to be involved in the solution. All of these countries of the Gulf and Saudi are dying to be allowed to spend some money. Saudi doesn't want to be anymore the country that killed this Khashoggi guy in Turkey. They don't want to be the country that when you say Saudi, you think about the fact that women are just now allowed to have driving license 2 years ago for the first time. They want you to say Saudi and think, oh, this is an influential player in the Middle East, doing good. They're dying to spend money in Gaza. They're dying to spend money in the West Bank. They have actually two things they want. One, they want this deal with the United States and Israel for protection to give them the military power. And the second thing they want is they want quiet. And for quiet, Israel has to go into a deal to get the West Bank and Gaza into some way in the next decade become an independent state. They demand it. They all say, at the moment, the head of the Israeli Mossad was meeting with the head of Qatar and separately with the head of the UAE. And they're all saying, and this is what the Biden administration is saying to Israel, you don't need to make a peace deal that will happen tomorrow, but you need to seriously sit down and start planning the future that ends with Palestinian independence. In that sense, the Palestinians succeeded in changing the situation. It's a black swan event. It's a big moment. But it's also, at least this is my political views, a great opportunity for Israel. A great opportunity for Israel. Israel should hold it. Our problem is that at the moment our prime minister, the guy here in the picture, Benjamin Netanyahu, is not willing in any way to go in that direction. He's not willing. I've had conversations today with a couple of friends. One of them is a soldier. He's been in Gaza for 68 days. He's been for the last 4 days with his family in Thailand. He's a very good friend of mine. And he knows that this will end when Netanyahu leaves. Not in the sense that fighting will end, because fighting will continue in Gaza until we secure the goal of breaking Hamas military and governmental rule over there. And that's an issue of time. But after that, you have to go towards some sort of negotiated solution. And Netanyahu has today 18% approval rating. Almost 80% of Israelis believe that in a moment we'll start the largest demonstrations ever. That's my hope. Yeah. I want to show you this and then one last thing, but this is my last slide. These are all Black Swan events, right? Peace with Egypt, peace with the Palestinians, peace with Jordan. Not all of them ended up perfectly, but they were all Black Swan events that nobody could believe it would happen. In my view, one of the biggest Black Swan events is the picture on the left. The guy with the white hair is David Ben-Gurion, Israel's first prime minister. The guy on the right, this is a photo taken in 1962. The guy on the right is Konrad Adenauer, the president of Germany, of West Germany at the time. Konrad Adenauer, it turned out later that for a short while he was in the Hitler Youth. Not like a kind of bad guy. He was part of the Nazi organization. Not the top and not anything of that sort. 1962 is not even one generation after the end of the Holocaust. If you look at the picture, Konrad Adenauer is laughing from something that David Ben-Gurion said while he's putting his hand on the German president's hand. And this is 17 years after the Holocaust. Hamas is horrible and did horrible things, but not even close to what Germany did. And if they can sit down and become friends, we can have a Black Swan event of that sort also here. When I want to do something in Israel to feel that I do a bit of positive, these are two organizations that I am involved in that I wanted to show you. This is called Standing Together. It's a Israeli and Arab organization. Its main purpose is to show Israelis that we can do things together. From protests to helping one another to helping farmers who've lost everything at the moment. Standing Together is a very important organization. And I wanted to show you, sorry, why'd you pull this? I wanted to show you this one. This is Tag Meir, another Israeli organization that I'm involved in. And this is an organization that says we need to bring light where there is darkness. Was this organization after every attack, if it's a terrorist attack by Palestinians, or if it's an attack by Israelis of Palestinians, if it's any attack, we will come to the hospital or to the house and bring flowers and a smile. Take responsibility of the actions that happened. Enormous campaigns of gathering donations for people who have been hurt, if it's by Palestinians or if it's by Israelis. So these are two organizations that I believe make a big difference here. There are two organizations about the two cultures meeting each other. But now I'll shut up and see if you have any last questions.
So Ilan, so basically this is an opportunity to really get rid of Netanyahu. And because coming back to two-state solution that was proposed and agreed on years ago.
Yeah.
And then right, but then how do you see now well, we actually touched on that, the Ukraine war and then the role of Russia in all that. because it's also, when you look at the world, you see that all those coalitions forming, and it's China, Russia, Iran, and it doesn't look great, right?
Russia used to be much more consequential in the area. There used to be the quartet, the four countries that were involved in Israel-Palestine issues. Yeah? Actually, not four countries. It used to be the United States, Russia, Egypt, and the UN. Russia is no longer in that game anymore. Russia today has been pushed out with its war with Ukraine. It used to be very involved in Syria. It's much less involved. When the war with Ukraine started, I guess some of you must have heard, definitely some of the Jews amongst us, 1 minute, Rick, that Israel didn't denounce Russia.
Right.
Yeah, that was mainly because Israel needs Russia in the area, definitely for actions in Syria. The big thing is that the war over here is taking armaments away from Ukraine, not specifically from Ukraine. For example, Israel passed over to Ukraine assault rifles. And that's not Israeli assault rifles. The United States has a big base in Israel where it keeps armament for such situations. So this means that the Ukraine can get less now. And in that sense, Russia is very happy. Russia is very happy for this to continue so that Ukraine will get less American help. But Russia doesn't have the power to get involved at the moment anymore. And nobody is really considering them. One of the kidnappees was released with Russian help, it was said. Right? And the Hamas said that he was released with Russian for Vladimir Putin, something Russian. Absolutely not. There were 12 Israeli kidnappees who had Russian citizenship, because we have a lot of Israelis that have Russian citizenship. Only one was released with Russian help. Why? Because Hamas needed to say thank you to Russia publicly. Russia didn't help in anything. The 11 others were released only through Israeli. Again, Russia is no longer very important here. Rick, you wanted to ask a question? Oh, you need to unmute yourself, Rick.
With the space bar, and it didn't work. So, Ilan, it seems to me that while we do the longer evolution to the two-state solution, that it's going to be very important that there be assistance to Gaza, to the Gazans, to the Palestinians that are living there, because Hamas never invested in them. They've invested in the military, the tunnels, all of that. They never invested in the people. Is there a way that this coalition of the Gulf states and Israel and, and the West can really help to get meaningful economic support for the Palestinians? Because I think that will go a long way to helping preserve the path to peace. And also, what happens with the West Bank if the path is to a two-state solution? What about the settlements? What's going to happen there? So I just wanted your thoughts.
Great question. Thank you. I'll start from the end with the settlements. To deal with the settlements needs a lot of political will, but it isn't impossible. About close to 90% of all the settlers live in what we call settlement blocks, very close to the border with Israel, touching upon the border with Israel, and in a block south of Jerusalem. About 12% of the settlers live in smaller places that are a bit problematic. there are maps, it's pretty clear about how to do it. It will demand a 9% territorial swap. And I highly recommend, there's a guy called Shaul Arieli. I'll send, once I finish with this, I'm going to start sending a newsletter. I've been working on it for the last couple of days. So I'll send also a bit of resources there. Shaul Arieli, he was a colonel in the Israeli military, and he was very involved as the map man in all the peace negotiations that happened since early 90s for Israel. And he's top notch with maps. Sometimes a little, I don't agree with everything he has to say, but he is amazing. And he has a very clear explanation about how to do the two-state solution, what goes to who. What's missing is the political will. That's why I say that this is an elastic moment. And if we go back to the beginning idea, once Israel gets hit very hard, once it starts breathing again, it is willing many times to do very difficult political concessions. That's what happened after 73. That's what happened first Intifada, the second Intifada. It doesn't happen automatically because we have been hurt very badly. The sense of security was hurt very badly. A lot of enormous traumas that haven't been processed yet. And it will take time to process. But once that is over, you find in the public a swing to the other direction. That suddenly the public says, I'm not willing to spend this much blood on this, because no longer is it theoretical blood. Now I see how much blood it is. And then we're willing to do solutions. Anyway, it takes a while. Yeah, once again, it takes a while to get there. And that's why I say we are in a great moment to start this. And because there's so many converging interests, there's a good chance that it's a ball that will start rolling. I hope did I answer it, Rick?
Yeah, what about the economic support for the Palestinians as the ball rolls? Do you think that can happen? Do you see a path for that?
That's not a real problem because, like I said, the Gulf states and Saudi are dying to get involved in order to change their perception in world media. And they're dying to put in money. And they're dying to putting in money into governance. And with all the criticism that we should have over Gulf countries and Saudi about their democracy and so forth, governance they know how to do. They run very complicated economies and they govern it well. Freedoms, democracy, other question, but they do. They are dying to create the Middle East as a region. And in that sense, also incorporate Israel into it. There is a lot of will amongst them, but they were close to getting to a point where they said, okay, we will skip giving the Palestinian status and we'll just make this regional deal. And what happened on the 7th of October meant to them that they can't skip the Palestinians. So they're demanding that as a part of a unbelievably lucrative package. And they will get involved, yeah.
I can have a question, Ilan?
Yeah.
This is wonderful. Just thank you so much. I mean, I can't, so good to see good faces too. Jeremy, but it's, I was wondering about, does Netanyahu have a vested interest to end this? Because won't he be in jail if he is not prime minister? And the other question, just in the public relations, because I've read in a lot over the weekend here in the States about David versus Goliath, which you were alluded to earlier. And when I grew up, or by, people older, they remember the Holocaust. In fact, that our kids, it's in the curriculum. We live in New York, though, where they learn the Holocaust and they have like almost like a full week of it. But the next generation has a different perspective because they look at, it's Israel is Goliath. And so I worry about Israel 20, 25 years out, you know, as the public relations of the younger people coming up when the other people, you know, and we've always supported Israel. So, and
Yeah.
thank you. This was wonderful.
Perfect
Thanks.
for what you're saying. I always think about the fact that I was born and grew up in the 90s, and when I did the tour guiding course to become a tour guide, all my group of fellow students were all alte kakers, Yiddish for old people. There were a lot of people who come to tour guiding do it as a kind of a thing once you've retired early. So about 50% of the course were ex-military, ex-FBI, and ex-Mossad in my group. I had 2 Mossad people, a couple of Shin Bet, a couple of military, the head of the cyber department of the police. They all came and did the course. And we used to have these political debates, and I was, younger and a little bit more hair and a firebrand, and having these arguments with them. And one day, one of them, who was the head of one of the big infantry battalions of the Israeli military, a serious guy, a very serious guy, he said to me, okay, you're lucky you were born in the 90s. I was born in the 50s. I was 16 between 1967 and 1973. I take different lessons from history. And that's always true. That's always true. People will take different lessons and the world looks different. And today, Israel is much stronger. It's much more of a Goliath than a David in the world perception. But at a certain point also, these myths need to end. Israel's not a Goliath and not a David. A myth helps us understand a complex story by making it simple. David, Goliath, big, small, strong, weak. It's more complicated than that. We are still weak. We are still a group that has large problems. It has a lot of enmity coming from large groups in the world. We're still a David in lots of places. And on the other hand, we're not. We are very successful. Jews who live around the world are usually pretty successful. Not everybody is, Mel Brooks with the good looks and the laughs. But we are successful. So we're also Goliath. This story, I think, has ended its usefulness. We need to find another story to explain ourselves, right? We use it sometimes when we say Israel is lost and will find its way again, right? That's another way. That's like a Hansel and Gretel kind of story, Little Red Riding Hood. There's lots of other stories that we can start using about ourselves. And lastly, for me, I love when I get to a moment of clarity after a moment of lack of clarity. And the clarity I have with this situation is I can be in 2 places at the same time, 2 ideas in the same time. I can criticize Israel for its shortcoming and stand for its right to be at the same time. And once that's my moment of clarity. My moment of clarity is not that we're a David or a Goliath. We're both. And everybody is both. And the Palestinians are both. And sometimes because they're so scary, they become a Goliath. And sometimes because they're so weak. And they're none of those. Everybody's more complicated, right? And we can get forward. Okay. I'm getting into this again, this lecture thingy. But that was my point, I think.
And what about Netanyahu if he, yeah.
Netanyahu, I feel stupid in saying something like this, like saying Netanyahu is not going to be around in about 6 months, because I did say this before in the past. I did say this, that Netanyahu is not going to be around for a long time, but now it's a little bit different. made this slide, but I felt a little bit bashed putting my, what do you say, propositions for the future? Whatever is the
What's
word
it
I'm
called?
looking for.
Prophecies?
Prophecies, thank you.
Prophecies, yeah.
Yeah. So this is what's going to be happening in the next 6 months, as I understand it, and I'm taking my information from many much smarter people than me. First of all, we have about 3 to 4 weeks for a victory photo. We won't be able to achieve all our goals. There's no doubt about it. I'm saying 3 or 4 weeks for something that will allow Israel to say that we have done part A. We can roll down our military involvement. This has to do, one, with the economic toll this is taking on Israel, which is incredible, the economic toll. It has to do with the toll in life. Every day we are waking up to soldiers who died. Every day or two we are waking up to kidnappees who were murdered or killed, or even killed by Israeli fire, if you've heard the last day by mistake. This is the amount of time. And number two, the US and the world pressure, the governments who are giving us a lot of slack and are all the, it doesn't matter what the population says, doesn't matter if the head of UPenn says whatever. Still, the governments give us a lot of support and a lot of slack. But that's ending. Specifically, it was the United States in January. Biden and the Democratic Party need quiet for their campaign. And Biden got a lot of, this is me talking very callously about all of the situation and lives through politics, but Biden and the DNC need this to quiet down. They got a lot of points from middle of the ground kind of, middle of the way between Democrats and Republicans who wanted to see a strong security stance. They got points for backing Israel so clearly, but now they still have to get points from the younger base in the Democratic Party. It's not the biggest part of the Democrats groups, but it's still very important. And the African American community, who both of them clearly skew pro-Palestinian. And this will happen in two ways. Or they succeed in getting Israel into a long-term kind of peace deal direction, something of that, and say it was worth it. Or there will start being more pressure on Israel, and you will see this happening, and this is, I promise you, you'll hear it in the next 2 or 3 weeks. Netanyahu's government will start criticizing Biden. This is going to happen soon. There's going to be criticism of Biden, and that's going to start mashing around, because Netanyahu, in order to stop the military advance, has to say, somebody stopped me. He can't stop it from himself. His electorate won't allow him. So he has to say, they made me stop it, and he will put it on Biden. Once that happens, Israel will not be able to keep it fighting. That's 3 to 4 weeks from now. That will create a roll down of the military mobilization. We'll have a return of reservists. We have around 300,000 reservists in active duty at the moment. It's an enormous number. Once that happens, these are the people who go out and demonstrate. The reservists, and once today I was at my accountant. I went to my CPA today. And after, doing we had a long political conversation. I love talking to her. And I asked her, she lives in central Tel Aviv, and she used to go to protests against Benjamin Netanyahu's government. I asked her, why don't you go now to the protests that are starting? They're mainly vigils by the families of the kidnappees, and you hear testimonies from kidnapped persons and families. It's moving towards anti-Netanyahu. And she said, no. I'm not willing to weaken my government at this moment of need. At this moment, when we are at war, I am not protesting against my government. And even if she totally believes Netanyahu has to go today, she will not call for Netanyahu to leave before there is some sort of resolution. And that, I guess, is majority of Israelis. They have that sentiment. The moment that the reservists are let out, the moment that the mobilization is taken down, then protests will erupt. Because that will be a moment where the reservists will come back and say to themselves, why have I fought for 70, 80 days in Gaza, 90 days, and we do not have the head of Sinwar on a platter, the head of Hamas in our hands? How come we didn't return all the hostages, all the kidnappees back to their homes? And the anger will erupt. There is incredible pent-up anger in Israel now. You see it on the TV constantly. Netanyahu will have to deal with that, and the moment the protests start, they will be incredible, incredibly large. And that will push for the calling for elections. Netanyahu is doing everything to stop that from happening. Legally, technically, he can run the clock out till middle of 2025 when there's supposed to be elections in Israel. Once the protest becomes so large, he will not be able to continue. That's what we're waiting for. But this is my projection, my prophecy. You know, once I feel certain about the future, I know I'm wrong. You know?
Yeah. Thank you.
Guys, my plan next, I'm working on doing a little bit of a newsletter. And I'll send out also a survey about the lecture. I'm thinking if I have lots of ideas of doing lectures about totally different topics, having discussions. I have ideas of maybe going to different sites in Israel. And some people ask me to maybe do a half-hour kind of update once every 2 weeks. I'm going to send out like a little survey, and if you have time and can answer it, I would love that. And if anybody has any comments or ideas for me, I would love to hear it either in an email or just tell me and we could do a Zoom call or a telephone call whenever. I'd love to hear what you think.
Ilan, I hate to interrupt you. I have to go.
Thanks, Jeremy.
Thank you so much. And hi to the Schaefers from me. Thank you.
Hi, Jeremy.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Ilan.
Thank you.
Bye.
Yep.
Okay.
Elon, this is Linda, and I was wondering, are you still going to do it, the presentations on YouTube? Because we have some people here and that we know that would like to see it.
But each one of them is an hour and a half, and it turns out to upload it to YouTube. It's a whole night, and you need to keep your computer plugged in. So yesterday I was trying to upload one of the videos. I didn't plug in my computer, and it just died the battery in the middle. So in the next couple of days, it will all be up there, and I'll also send a newsletter with links to the YouTube and everything.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, and thank you for these presentations. I've really enjoyed them.
Thank you, guys. You do not know how much I've enjoyed it.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Ilana. It's been so nice to see you and hear your thoughts, and just so appreciate and look forward to the newsletter and other opportunities. So thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank
I
you.
second that. Yes. Thank you, Ilan.
Thanks, guys. See you soon.
Thanks a
See you
lot.
soon.
Have a great
Yeah,
night.
stay safe. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Gotta leave.
All right.